300 by 300 by 400 print volume. Independent dual extruders. 9-point auto bed leveling. Built-in Wi-Fi. Built-in camera. Dual Z-axis lead screws. A 4.3-inch color touchscreen. Easily removable bed. Filament runout detection. Power failure resume. And all for $699. Is the Weedo X40 too good to be true at that price? Let's take a look. Hi there, I'm Nils and welcome to the 3D Printing Zone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Weedo X40. This is a fairly new printer that came out in 2020 and we're going to look at all of its features and find out what it does well and what it needs some improvement on to see if it's the right printer for you. Starting right off with the unboxing experience, this one came packaged just like many printers do nowadays. It was about 90 to 95% assembled. It took me less than an hour to get everything assembled, put together, and get my first print started. The instructions were definitely a little on the sparse side, but everything worked out okay, and it's really not that difficult of a printer to put together. And like I said, I was up and printing in no time. So let's start out talking about the pros on this printer, and there are a lot of them. So right up front here we have the touchscreen, and this is a 4.3-inch color touchscreen, and this is as good of a touchscreen as I've interacted with 3D printers. It works very smoothly. I don't have to hit things over and over. It's not stubborn. It just works really well, and it works just as you would hope it would, basically. Next is the independent dual extruders. Now this is my third printer that has IDEX, and these are really convenient. If you haven't experienced this before, it's quite nice, especially if you plan on doing any multicolor printing. And by multi, I mean two color. It's not going to handle more than that unless you want to switch out filaments midway. So it's pretty capable. It works as expected. It does have some nice little brushes here and little tabs that it does a clear. Basically, it purges a little bit of filament out and then wipes that off so that it doesn't bring anything onto the print bed, which is really smart. So that works really quite well. Now another thing I really like on this printer are the dual Z-axis lead screws back here. And what that means is that when either side of this X-axis moves up, the other side will move at the exact same speed and the exact same height. And that just keeps everything nice and level, so your X-axis has a better chance of getting a perfect layer down on that bed. The layout or configuration on this printer is set up pretty nicely. Now this is a large printer, so it's going to take up a lot of space, so you need to account for that when you're thinking about a purchase like this. But as far as being self-contained, it does a fairly decent job. It's got all of the components, the power supply and everything right in here. You've got your power switch over on the side, and everything's kind of just right here. Everything stems up from there. You do have a lot of cables that kind of hang out. So as this Z-axis comes down, then basically these guys poke out. You've got your cables over here if you're going to hook this up to an Octoprint or Octopi or anything like that, or hook it up to your computer. That's going to stick out. So I'd say overall it's a pretty well designed machine, and I like that it's mostly self-contained. This printer comes with pretty much everything you need for 3D printing to get started. So it has a couple of spool holders that mount onto the top of the gantry. It has a couple of small spools of PLA filament. It's got 4 extra nozzles, and these do use a 0.4 millimeter nozzle on here. A couple of wrenches to change out your nozzles or any other nuts and bolts on the machine. You've got some zip ties, all of the Allen wrench sizes that you might need for it, a pair of snips, and then you've got a couple of extra brushes. These are the same ones that mount up here for cleaning off your nozzles, and then a micro SD to USB card reader. So really, everything you need to get started is included in the packaging. Another thing I like about this is the micro SD card that comes with it has a bunch of different sample files that you can try out and print right away. It's got the articulating butterfly, it's got an articulating fish, it's got the little Martian figure, it's got some tests for just doing the dual extruder options. It doesn't come with a Mandalorian helmet. You got to get that separately, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But it's got all kinds of stuff on there, and in addition, it's got both kind of a rough tuning and a fine tuning for the dual extruders to make sure that they're lining up and that they're their exact right distance apart from one another. So that makes it really easy to get everything calibrated just the way you need to for the printer on the first use. Now one of the bonuses that comes with the fact that this has Wi-Fi is there's an app that you can use alongside it. And in the app you actually have a whole library of different models that you can download and print or send right to the printer remotely from your phone. So that's really convenient. So all of these things that you see up front here were printed right away. I didn't do anything other than just level the bed and they were good to go. Now, in addition to the model library on the app, there's also a screen here where you can monitor your prints and see exactly what's going through the camera. You can also check out the heat settings and everything else. You can cancel a print. Anything that you need to do as far as basic needs are all right here on the app itself, and those can be controlled remotely, which is really convenient. Now, another great feature that this one comes built in with is a 9-point auto bed leveling system, and this is super convenient. Now, one thing I'm not sure about on this is that it comes with a steel bed. It's got some flex to it, so if you're doing a big print like a helmet here, it can help flex that print right off when you're done. It's not going to help much on small prints like this. And if I'm not mistaken, the sensor that it uses for bed leveling is actually detecting metal. So I'm not sure what would happen if you swapped out your steel plate here for a glass bed, for example, or a carborundum bed, or even a thicker build tack bed. So with all these crazy good features that this thing has, are there any things that it doesn't have or doesn't do well? The answer is yes. There's quite a few things that are on my pet peeve list, and let's go through some of those to talk about whether they make a big difference to you and your printing or not. Now, the first one for me is the fact that every time you turn this on, I'm not going to do it right now, because what it will do is every time you turn it on, it comes down, it moves both heads along, and it tries to do a bit of a calibration as soon as you turn it on. Not only that, if you cancel out of certain menus while you're trying to do leveling or anything else, it will then try to kind of home itself or reset itself again as well. And it feels like it does this constantly. And that's honestly pretty annoying to me. I wish that it would do that when I hit print and I'm ready to actually do something with it, but in the meantime, I don't need to sit here and wait for it to do that every single time. So I feel like I'm kind of blocked out of the menus often because I'm waiting for this thing to do its little song and dance that it has to do every time. Another one that may seem small but is a definite design flaw is the micro USB card reader. When you pop this in, it's extremely easy to put it just maybe a millimeter too low, and then it falls into the cavity of the body here. And then you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little bolts out, and then kind of pry this open a little bit and see if you can reach in and grab that. Even when you do that, it's not enough room for your fingers to actually grab in there, so I've been using a straw and a vacuum to try to suck up the micro SD card that fell in there and then grab it away from the straw. I should not have to do that. Like, that's really silly that they made it that easy to drop micro SD cards into the body of the printer. So definitely a pet peeve of mine and something you've really got to watch out for when you're inserting that. Now let's talk about the app. The app that it uses is called Print Pro, and there's a couple of huge caveats that you have to be aware of with this. So under ideal circumstances, it's actually quite handy. It works really well, but there's a few things to be aware of. Number one, it doesn't come on iOS. This is only for Android, and I actually keep one Android phone around just for these sorts of purposes. But if you are an iOS person, if you're in the Apple ecosystem, then you need to access this via an Android app. To me, that's a major shortcoming. I mean, there are literally, in the United States anyways, more Apple phones in use than Android phones, and so that's not something that we should have to worry about. The second thing is, in order to use that app, you have to have one of two accounts already set up. You have to either have a WeChat account or a Facebook account. I have plenty of friends who are not using either of those and don't want to use either of those and wouldn't want to be forced into signing up for one of those in order just to use the app. I mean, you can do nothing in the app without one of those accounts, so definitely something you need to be aware of. So if you're an Android user and a Facebook user, you're in good shape. If not, you're pretty much out of luck. So now that it's powered on, I'm going to go to my Print Pro app here, and it's going to quickly search for it. Oh, it's going to make me sign in with Facebook again. Okay, so it remembered that, which is good. And right here I've got a picture. It's a very small picture. I've got a picture of what the camera sees. Now this brings me to one of my other issues, is the only way I can figure out to access this camera is through this little app here. And I've got this little small image here, and then when I change it here, I can get it this big. If I change it sideways, the image seems to go away. I can't get it to show up again, so that's a little frustrating. If I go back, it'll take a minute before it shows up again, but it eventually will. And so I'm going to go back out to the home screen here, or the main screen, the monitor screen, and we'll give it a few minutes. There's nothing there, so it's like, where's my image? It's not showing up for whatever reason. So then when I'm in here, I've got a couple of options. I've got local files here that I can print right from here, and there's the preview again. Now if I go over to the library, obviously I've printed some of these and it's worked before, but it has stopped working. So I've uninstalled, I've reconnected, I've reinstalled, I've signed out, I've signed in, I've done everything I can think of to try to get this to work. But if I go to any of these items in this library now, let's say I want to do this Love Gear, and I hit print, It takes me back to my monitor. It's got the temperatures and everything, but nothing's happening. So it says status operational as opposed to status printing. No matter what I try to click on in there, I cannot get it to print anything. So I'll print another thing, print, nothing. Now if I do click on my Mandalorian helmet, for example, that's saved on the file here, then it will actually go ahead and print that. So it does read the things that are on the card, or that it's saved already basically, and so you can print from there. And then once it's printing, you can in fact cancel it, and you can move your the X and Y and Z axis around like this. So it has some function, but that's really about it. Now, as you would imagine, this only works on your local network. So if I were to try to take this off and use it on data or on someone else's network, I have no access to this. It cannot find the printer. It's not a remote setup for doing things from other locations, only within your same network. Now, with all that having been said, if what you're looking for is the ability to keep an eye on your prints while you're in another room, this will do the job. The view here is super wide angle, so the heads on this are teeny tiny, as you can see in this close-up here. But there's, it's something. You can at least see if something's gone majorly wrong. I don't think it's a high-res camera, and it's certainly not zoomed in on whatever it is you're printing. It's just, here's everything in a tiny little thumbnail. Hope that's enough kind of thing. Now, another question I had was whether or not this works with Octoprint. If you've seen my channel before, you know I like to use Octoprint to remotely control things. I like to use Spaghetti Detective, for example, to see if anything's gone wrong and do time lapses, all that sort of thing. And the answer is I'm not quite sure. I have not gotten it to work. So when I connect this, I can get into the interface and everything in Octoprint works well, but when I try to connect to the printer, it scrolls through the different baud rates and tries to find one to connect to the printer with, and is unsuccessful and never ends up connecting to the printer. Now, if you've got any tips on that or know how to connect properly to Octoprint with the Weedo X40, please leave a comment in the comment section below so that we can all learn from that. Another area that I think is a little bit of an odd choice is that they went with Bowden tubes and separate extruder motors as opposed to doing a direct drive system on these. So if you're not familiar with that, that just means that it increases, I guess, the chance of a flexible material, for example, causing some issues. And anytime you have a direct drive system where the extruder is mounted as close to the nozzle and hot end as possible, that's going to give you a better chance of having a successful print and not having stuff oozing out where it shouldn't. Another decision that I really question on this is why can't I adjust the tension of any of the belts? So I've got my Y-axis belt back here. In this case, this one's really taut, really tight. These ones are a little loose. They're not bad, but they could be better. You've got two of them for the X-axis, one for each hot end, and there's no adjustments that I can see that you can make on here. Like there's not even a little bit of give that you can loosen a screw, pull it a little bit, and tighten it. They're just fixed in place, and so they better be good. And luckily, these ones seem to be pretty decent, but I have a question as to whether or not these are the cause of some printing issues I've seen. So I would love to have these actually be set up to where they can be adjusted like a lot of printers are. Now, in the several weeks that I've been testing out the Weedo X40, I found that several times actually, one of the print heads will actually bump into the other one, and then you get this terrible grinding and clicking as the belts aren't sure what to do and that sort of thing. It's happened on both sides because there's no way for them to know if there's space in between them. So this one will come over and smack into this one here and make a big huge racket and everything like that. I've also seen it to where it seems to ignore some of the end limits, the limit switches that are on here, and it will just, the bed will keep moving in one direction, for example, on the Y-axis, and again, make that terrible racket and that sort of thing. Luckily, neither of those are common, and they haven't been a big issue, but it worries me a little bit that I've seen that, so something to be aware of and something to watch out for. Now, another thing about the Wi-Fi that comes with this is that I find it's extremely limiting that you have Wi-Fi. It has that capability, but it's not connected to any other services, and the door is essentially closed on what you can do with it unless you have an Android phone and the PoloPrint Pro app and a WeChat or a Facebook account that you can log into all of that stuff, and that's exactly what you want. So it's kind of like saying, yeah, your car has air conditioning, but it won't turn on unless it's under 65 degrees and you're heading south. That's really not all that convenient, and there's only certain times when you might actually want that. So not sure why they decided to go with such a limiting thing, and maybe some future firmware updates could improve that. The bed that comes on this printer, as we talked about earlier, is a steel bed. So it's got an aluminum bed on here and then a steel plate on top with some build tack, probably a sticker, I would guess, on top of that. And what I've noticed so far is that it does stick well. So if you're worried about your prints sticking on it, that doesn't seem to be an issue on this. What it doesn't do all that well is let go of the prints. I've had to totally pry under there even when the bed is totally cooled down. And luckily I have this little spatula that's got a really pretty sharp point under here that I can usually get underneath and lift things up and kind of work it around under there. I did a video recently on why I love the carborundum bed, and after all of these 16 printers, that is by far my favorite, and you can check that out right up here. But that one, I would love to be able to put a carborundum bed on here so it just lets go of the print when you're done. The problem is, I think because of this magnetic sensor here, I think that would be an issue. So again, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it's detecting that as soon as it gets to a certain height, and that would be a problem if you've got 4 or 5 millimeters of, you know, carborundum and glass in between that and the metal. So let's talk about what I think matters most in a 3D printer, and that is, can it print well? Can it do a good job and give you the results that you would expect from a 3D printer? I can say on this one, it actually does do a good job printing. If we take a close look at Phil here, for example, he's got a very smooth surface just about everywhere. There is a teeny bit of an offset between the white and the red that shouldn't be there, maybe a little bit of a gap on one side and a ledge on the other, and that's my fault. That's just because I hadn't actually calibrated the 2 extruders before printing this. And once you get those calibrated, that locks it in really nicely. So all of the surfaces on this are looking really good, honestly, and this is a good looking print in my opinion. I think this is something that makes me say, like, this is a good printer that can print really well and can do a high quality job. Another good test of that are these articulating pieces that came on the SD card or in the library, and I didn't have any trouble printing these either. So they print on the bed like this, and they have to have just the right tolerances in here in order for these to be able to break free and to move the way you expect them to move, and they do that really well. Both the fish here and the butterfly, they move in all directions just like you would expect them to. So that actually makes me feel like this thing actually has all that it needs to do really good prints, and they've been honed in for these particular files. They're sliced right, everything's set up right, and they work really well. And mind you, these were some of the very first prints that I did on this printer. Now, like many printers, especially ones that are not geared for just the very beginner, this one's a little more expensive, has a lot of features, and has a lot going on. It may take some calibrating and some tweaking to get it to do exactly what you want it to do. So we know from these initial prints that it can print really well. It can do a great job when you've got everything dialed in. And that has, I think, more to do with the slicer settings than anything else. But I'm a little curious about this, and I mentioned the belts earlier and the tension on the belts because when I printed this Mandalorian helmet, this took about a day and a half to print at a 0.3 millimeter layer height, and I've got some definite issues on this. So if you look closely up here, we've got some gaps all along the back where it looks like it just kind of skipped a layer almost. But then if you look at the front, you can see that those gaps are likely because it seems to have pushed some layers out. So that leads me to believe that we've got some layer shift happening on these. And that often has to do with the tension of the belts. So that could very well be the case here. Now, those are happening on the y-axis, and that's really curious to me because the y-axis on this is quite tight, and I would think it might be a little over tight, but it's actually pretty decent. I would think it's actually a pretty healthy tension on there, but that doesn't help me understand why we're getting some of this layer shift. But if we look further down here, we can see there is definite layer shift. Right here by the earpieces, for example, we've got these gaps, and it like totally missed on one side and shifted over on the other. So that is a definite issue with a layer shift. So that's something I'm going to have to keep troubleshooting and working on. We've also got some under extrusion issues happening with our tree supports here, and that's actually the reason I haven't taken these supports off. I've had this print done for several days, but haven't taken them off just because I wanted to show exactly what it did right out of the printer. We've got some spots where it skipped or missed, and that could happen for any number of reasons. But overall, it was a successful print, and I can do some post-processing on the Mando helmet here to get it looking really good. Of course, I'd rather not have to do very much at all of that, if any. Ideally, if this was really smooth and came out really great, then I would have to do very little to it. I'm still going to paint it. I'll probably do some little Bondo or at least some filler spray on here. In this case, I'm going to have to do Bondo, I think, because it's pretty rough on some of these surfaces. By the way, I will be finishing the Mandalorian helmet completely off, getting it all really nice and pretty. I'll paint it and kind of give it any effects that it needs to have as far as wear and tear and all of that. So if you want to keep an eye on that, then you can check those out on my social media channels, which I've got links to in the description below. So we've covered all kinds of pros, we've covered all kinds of cons, we've talked about the price, which at $6.99 I think is pretty decent for all that you're getting. So the question is, would I recommend that someone buy this? And the answer is not super easy. I would think that if you're a beginner and you're very new to 3D printing, I think this might be a little much for you. There's a lot that you'd have to kind of figure out and try to tweak. There's a lot that might be tricky if you're unfamiliar with it. But if you're new and you're ambitious and you are willing to dive in, I think yes, this would be a good one. If you're fairly familiar with 3D printing and have been around the block a couple of times, then I think this would be a nice addition. And at this big size, I love the 300 by 300 size. It's one of my favorite sizes as far as printing. You rarely need more than that, and you just don't want to not have that size when you do need it for printing bigger things like this. All of the features that it has, even if the camera is not quite where we want it to be, the fact that it has something built in, and I do have the potential to be able to check that. The touchscreen works really well. The dual extruders, the independent dual extruders is really nice. And then the layout and form factor would make me say I would recommend this for someone who's got a little bit of experience with 3D printing. And at $6.99, there aren't many printers out there that can compare all of these features at that price point. Now I'd love to hear what you think. Is this the type of printer that you would be interested in or you think is worth the money? You can leave your comments in the comment section below. Now if you're thinking about buying a Weedo X40 or you just want to learn more, I've got links in the description below that you can check out. If you're interested in seeing some of the other 3D printer reviews we've done here on the 3D Printing Zone, you can check those out right here. I'm Nils with the 3D Printing Zone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.